Hello and welcome to CHA's production of Pride and Prejudice. Please turn off all cellular devices as they are disruptive and can interfere with microphones. Also, no flash photography, please. Thank you.
You are punctual to your time, I see. Very glad indeed. Delighted to have the pleasure of receiving you here at Longbourn. The Bennets of Longbourn. Pray, allow me to make you acquainted with my daughters. Come along, Jane. Miss Jane Bennet.
The eldest. Though I cannot see why she must always have the chair nearest the window.
Hush, Lydia.
And the prettiest of all.
Mary, for goodness sake.
The next, Elizabeth.
Wittiest of all.
Though Captain Halley of the regiment expressed her to be the most critical young lady in Hertfordshire.
In the only complete sentence I ever heard him construct.
Law.
And, book in hand as always, Mary.
The proudest.
Pride is a very common failing, I believe. By all that I've ever read, I am convinced that it is very common indeed, and that there are very few of us who do not cherish a feeling of self-complacency on the score of some quality or other, real or imaginary.
And last,
Vanity and
but
pride
not...
are different things, although the words are often used synonymously. A person may be proud without being vain.
I must
Pride
finally...
relates more to our opinion of ourselves. Vanity to what we would have others think of us.
Well, yes, quite so. And the two youngest, of course, Kitty and Lydia.
Are we to be only the youngest? Have we no other qualities? We are the best dancers with the prettiest hats. And sing most charmingly. Well, I do.
Oh, Mr. Bennet! My dear Mr. Bennet!
Mrs. Bennet, to be sure.
My dear Mr. Bennet, have you heard that Netherfield Park is let at last?
I have not.
But it is, for Mrs. Long has just been there, and she told me all about it.
Probably an elderly bachelor with a King Charles Spaniel.
Indeed, Mr. Bennet. Do not you want to know who has taken it?
You want to tell me, and I have no objection to hearing it.
Mrs. Long says that Netherfield Park is taken by a young man of large fortune.
Really?
He came down on Monday and was so delighted with it that he is to take possession before Michaelmas.
Married or single?
We might first inquire of the gentleman's name, Lydia.
Bingley.
But married or single?
Oh, single, my dears, to be sure. A single man of large fortune. 4,000 or 5,000 a year.
It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife.
However little known the feelings or views of such a man may be, this truth is so well fixed in the minds of the surrounding families that he is considered the rightful property of some one or others of their daughters.
Oh dear.
Oh, hush, Lizzie. What a fine thing for our girls.
How so?
That he might marry one of us, Papa.
And is that his design in settling here?
Design? Nonsense! It is not unusual that a young man may fall in love.
Though he must be a soldier in a red regimental jacket.
You must go and visit him as soon as he comes.
I see no occasion for that. You and the girls may go. Or send them by themselves, which perhaps may be still better, for as you are as handsome as any of them, Mr. Bingley might like you best of the party.
Well, I certainly have my share of beauty. But when a woman has 5 grown-up daughters, she ought to give over ideas of her own attractions.
But in most cases, a woman has often not much beauty to think of.
But consider your daughters. Think what an establishment it would be for one of them.
You are over-scrupulous, surely. I will send a few lines by you to assure him of my hearty consent to his marrying whichever he chooses.
Oh, Mr. Bennet, you take delight in vexing me. You have no compassion on my poor nerves.
My dear, I have a high respect for your nerves. They are my old friends.
You do not know what I suffer.
But I hope you will get over it and live to see many young men of 4,000 a year come into the neighborhood.
It would be of no use to us if 20 such should come, since you will not visit them.
Depend on it, my dear. When there are 20, I will visit them all.
Despite his protestations, Papa was among the earliest of those who waited on Mr. Bingley.
Oh, capital, Lydia. I hope Mr. Bingley will like it.
Papa! We are not in any way to know what Mr. Bingley likes, since we are not to visit.
It isn't fair, Papa. Really, it isn't.
You forget that we shall meet him at the assemblies, and that Mrs. Long has promised to introduce us.
I do not believe Mrs. Long will do any such thing. She has 2 nieces of her own.
And plain as cake. Both of them.
She is a selfish, hypocritical woman, and I have no opinion of her.
Indeed, but let us return to Mr. Bingley.
Oh, and I say I am sick of Mr. Bingley.
My dear, why did you not tell me so before? If I had known as much this morning, I certainly would not have called on him.
Called on him. Called on him! Called on him!
Really, Father?
Oh, now see what an excellent father you have, girls. But I knew I should persuade you at last.
Yes, I fear that as I have actually paid the visit, we cannot help escape his acquaintance now.
Come, Darcy. I hate to see you standing about by yourself in this stupid manner. You had much better dance.
You know how I detest it, unless I am particularly acquainted with my partner. Your sister is engaged, and there is not another woman in the room whom it would not be a punishment for me to stand up with.
Would not be so fastidious as you are for a kingdom. I never met with so many pleasant girls in my life, and several uncommonly pretty.
Your partner, the eldest Miss Bennet, is the only handsome girl in the room.
Indeed, the most beautiful creature I ever beheld. But there is one of her sisters, just there, whom I dare say is very agreeable. Allow me to ask my partner to introduce you.
She is tolerable, but that is insufficient to tempt me. Pray return to Miss Bennet. You are wasting your time with me.
My dear Mr. Bennet, we have a most excellent ball. Jane is so admired, and Mr. Bingley danced with her twice. Then the third, he turned to Miss King, and the fourth with Maria Lucas, then the fifth with Jane again, and the sixth...
If he had any compassion for me, he would not have danced half so much.
He is just what a young man ought to be. Sensible, good-humored, lively, and I never saw such happy manners, so much ease, with such perfect good breeding.
He is also handsome, which a young man should be if he possibly can.
I can hardly explain to you the shocking rudeness of Mr. Darcy.
Then, how wise not to try, my love?
I was very much flattered by his asking me to dance a second time. I did not expect such a compliment.
Did not you? Compliments always take you by surprise, and me, never.
I can assure you that Lizzie loses nothing by not suiting that Mr. Darcy's fancy, for he is a disagreeable, horrid man.
But tall, my dear. Tolerably tall.
You are a great deal too apt to like people in general. You never see a fault in anybody. I swear, Jane, that I never heard you speak ill of a human being in my life.
I would not wish to be hasty in censuring anyone.
Your Mr. Darcy is so high and conceited that there is no enduring him. Lizzie not handsome enough to dance with. Oh, I quite detest the man.
I always speak what I think.
With your good sense, to be so honestly blind to the follies and nonsense of others.
Miss Bennet, might you consider a stroll about the room?
Within a short walk of Longbourn lived a family with whom we were particularly intimate.
Sir William Lucas, formerly in trade at Meryton, had made a tolerable fortune and risen to the honor of knighthood.
And gives 2 balls a season.
And their daughter, Charlotte, is my particular friend.
Occupied as you are in observing Mr. Bingley's attentions to your sister, I think you do not suspect that you yourself have become, shall I say, an object of interest.
Indeed, where?
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, all to my hearth and home. What more charming amusement for young people than a dance, eh? I consider it one of the first refinements of polar societies.
Any savage can dance, sir.
Wit, sir, wit indeed.
Do you not notice that Mr. Darcy seems always on the fringes of your conversation?
Mrs. Long told me last night that he sat close to her for half an hour without once opening his lips.
Miss Bingley told me that he never speaks much unless among his intimate acquaintances.
You waste the born, idle chatter.
Note him.
He has an extremely critical eye, and if I do not begin by being impertinent myself, I shall soon grow afraid of him. Did you not think, Mr. Darcy, that I expressed myself uncommonly well just now, when I was teasing Colonel Forster to give us a ball at Meryton?
With great energy, but it is a subject which always makes a lady energetic.
My dear Eliza, why are you not dancing? Mr. Darcy, you cannot refuse to dance, I am sure, when such beauty is before you.
Indeed, sir, I had not the least intention of dancing. I entreat you not to suppose I moved this way in order to beg for a partner.
Might I have the honor of your hand for the next, Miss Bennet?
Mr. Darcy is all politeness, but I must deny myself the pleasure.
Miss Bingley.
Mr. Darcy,
I can guess the subject of your reverie.
I should imagine not.
You are considering how insupportable it would be to pass many evenings in such society. And indeed, I am quite of your opinion.
I want to wear a gown with 12 ribbons and a double rosette.
The insipidity, the noise, the nothingness, and yet the self-importance of all these people. What I would give to hear your strictures on them.
Your conjecture is totally wrong, I assure you.
Oh?
I have been meditating on the very great pleasure which a pair of fine eyes in the face of a pretty woman can bestow.
Truly? Pray, tell me what lady has the credit of inspiring such reflections.
Miss Elizabeth Bennet.
I confess I am in all astonishment. How long has she been such a favorite? And when am I to wish you joy?
I expected as much. A lady's imagination is very rapid. It jumps from admiration to love to matrimony in a moment.
Nay, I shall consider the matter as absolutely settled.
Oh, indeed, you are a scamp and a rogue, Sir William. Oh, you will make me laugh.
You will have a charming mother-in-law indeed. And you will have the pleasure of her always being at Pemberley with you.
Mr. Bennet, you must come and hear what this mischievous fellow is saying.
Miss Bennet, pray forgive even the appearance of unwanted attention. But might I request this reel?
Indeed, sir. It is rather an honor than a request.
The honor I believe to be mine.
Seems that Jane quite admires Mr. Bingley.
Noticeably, I would agree.
Bingley likes your sister, undoubtedly. But he may never do more than like her if she does not help him on.
But she does help him on, as much as her nature will allow.
Remember, Eliza, he does not know Jane's disposition as you do. Though they meet tolerably often, it is never for many hours together. Jane should therefore make the most of every moment she can command his attention.
Your plan is a good one, where nothing is in question but the determination to get a rich husband. These are not Jane's feelings, and she has no such design. She takes time, I think, to study his character.
Well, I wish her success, with all my heart. And if she married him tomorrow, I should think she has as good a chance of happiness as if she had studied his character for a 12-month. It is better to know as little as possible of the defects of a person with whom you are to pass your life.
You make me laugh, Charlotte, but it is not sound, and you know full well you would never act in such a way yourself.
You are being watched.
At Longbourn, Jane found herself in receipt of an invitation.
My dear friend, if you are not so compassionate as to dine today with me,
we shall be in danger of hating each other for the rest of our lives. Come as soon as you can on receipt of this. We shall dine with my brother, as well as other gentlemen, and sundry officers.
Yours ever,
Caroline Bingley.
May Kitty and I go as well, Mamma?
We should like to meet sundry officers.
Am I mistaken that there was but one name on the invitation?
May I have the carriage, Father?
Of course.
Indeed not. It would be much better, Jane, to go on horseback. For the weather looks ill, and you might have the good fortune to be thoroughly soaked and stay longer with the Bingleys in ill health.
Mamma's hopes were answered. Jane had not been gone long when it rained, torrents.
That was a lucky idea of mine indeed.
For you, Liz. News from Netherfield, I think.
My dearest Lizzie,
I find myself very unwell this morning, which I suppose is to be imputed to my getting wet through yesterday. The Bingleys will not hear of my returning home till I am better.
though excepting a sore throat and a headache, there is not much the matter with me. Yours, Jane.
Well, my dear, if your daughter should have a dangerous fit of illness and die, it would be a comfort to know it was all in pursuit of Mr. Bingley and under your orders.
Oh, nonsense. People do not die of little trifling colds, and the inconvenience, Mr. Bennet, is worth the prize.
She feels ill, and I will go to her.
Is this a hint to me, Lizzie, to send for the horses?
The horses are wanted on the farm. I will walk. The distance is nothing when one has a motive.
You cannot go jumping over stiles and arrive with dirty stockings.
Jane, at least, will forgive me, Mother.
Miss Elizabeth, how remarkably good of you to come.
Mr. Bingley, a pleasure, of course. You can imagine that my sister's letter gave me some cause for concern.
I wish I could answer that concern more favorably. Miss Bennet has slept ill, and though up, is not well enough to leave her room.
Lizzie!
Jane, you are flushed. Should not you be in bed?
We have sent for the apothecary. I would be most grateful, Miss Elizabeth, if you would remain at Netherfield until your sister is quite well. I will dispatch a servant to acquaint your family and return with any necessities.
Mr. Bingley, I cannot attempt to thank you.
Any thanks are far beyond the occasion, Miss Bennet. Believe me, I have no pleasure superior to that of contributing to yours.
Well,
He is most attentive.
indeed he is. You look quite drawn, Jane, but I might say it serves you exactly for falling in with Mother's advice.
Lizzie, how did you get here?
To walk 3 miles, or 4 miles, or 5 miles, or whatever it is, above her ankles in mud and alone, quite alone. What could she mean by it? It seems to me to show an abominable sort of conceited independence and complete indifference to decorum.
It shows an affection for her sister that is very pleasing.
I have an excessive regard for Jane Bennet, and I wish she were well settled. But with such a father and a mother and such low connections, I am afraid there is no chance of it. Their uncle is an attorney in Meryton, and another lives somewhere near Cheapside.
If they had uncles enough to fill all Cheapside, it would not make them one jot less agreeable. Ah, Miss Elizabeth, a pleasure. Your sister improves, I hope?
She is resting, but hopes not to be thought unsociable.
Indeed not. I find it singular and intriguing that you prefer reading to cards, Miss Bennet.
Miss Elizabeth Bennet despises cards.
She is a great reader, with little pleasure in anything else.
I deserve neither such praise nor such censure. I am not a great reader, and I have pleasure in many things.
Is Miss Darcy much grown since the spring? How I long to see your charming sister again, such manners and so accomplished for her age.
It is amazing to me how young ladies can have patience to be so very accomplished as they all are.
All? My dear Charles, what do you mean?
Yes, Caroline, all. I've never heard of a young lady spoken of for the first time without being informed that she was very accomplished.
I fear I cannot boast no more than a half-dozen in the whole range of my acquaintance that are really accomplished.
Then you must comprehend a great deal in your idea of an accomplished woman.
She must have a thorough knowledge of music, singing, drawing, dancing, languages, a certain something in her air and manner, the tone of her voice, her address and expressions of the word will be but half deserved.
And to all this, she must yet add something more substantial in the improvement of her mind. By extensive reading.
I am no longer surprised at your knowing only 6 accomplished women. I rather wonder now at your knowing any.
I say, sister, would you perhaps take the pianoforte and favor us with a lively Scotch air?
Splendid, and perhaps Miss Bennet will then seize the opportunity to show us a fling, simple seeming but difficult in the execution. Will you essay, Miss Bennet?
Oh, I heard you before. You wanted me, I know, to say yes, that you might have the pleasure of despising my taste. But I always take delight in cheating a person of their premeditated contempt, and have therefore made up my mind to tell you that I do not want to dance a reel at all. And now, despise me if you dare.
Oh! Very sorry, Darcy.
And is Mr. Darcy not to be laughed at?
The wisest and best of men may be rendered ridiculous by a person whose first object in life is a joke.
Certainly there are such people, but I hope I am not one of them. I hope I never ridicule what is wise and good. Follies and nonsense, whims and inconsistencies do divert me, I own, and I laugh at them whenever I can. But these, I suppose, are precisely what you are without.
Perhaps that is not possible for anyone, but it has been the study of my life to avoid those weaknesses.
Such as vanity and pride.
Yes, vanity is a weakness indeed. But pride, where there is a real superiority of mind, pride will be always under good regulation. I have faults enough, but they are not, I hope, of understanding. My temper I dare not vouch for. It is, I believe, too little yielding and perhaps resentful. My good opinion once lost is lost forever.
That is a failing indeed. But you have chosen your fault well. I really cannot laugh at it. You are safe from me.
There is, I believe, in every disposition, a tendency to some particular evil, a natural defect which even the best education cannot overcome.
And your defect is a propensity to hate everybody.
And yours is willfully to misunderstand them.
The carriage was sent, and Jane and Elizabeth returned home. Mamma, I fear, is not very cordial to them.
I cannot for the life of me see, Elizabeth, why you had to rush Jane home.
Well, I, for one, am gratified. Our evening conversation had lost much of its animation, and almost all its sense.
Oh, Mr. Bennet.
Oh, pooh.
My dear, I hope you have ordered a good dinner today, because I have reason to expect an addition to our family party.
Is it Mr. Bingley? Why, Jane, you never dropped a word of this, you sly thing.
It is not Mr. Bingley. It is my cousin, Mr. Collins, who, when I am dead, may turn you all out of this house as soon as he pleases.
But why, Papa?
It is the entail, Kitty, the entail of which I often remind you. The inheritance of my property is limited to male heirs, and as I have produced none, my cousin Mr. Collins has become the legal recipient. Now...
Oh, pray do not talk of that odious man and this odious legality. It is monstrous that your estate should be entailed away from your own children.
Mr. Collins was punctual to his time.
Ah, Mrs. Bennet, Mr. Bennet. As a pastor of the Church of England, I flatter myself that my present overtures of goodwill are highly commendable, and that the circumstances of my being next in the entail of the Longbourn estate will be kindly overlooked on your part, and not lead you to reject my proffered olive branch. As for your daughters, I have heard much of their beauty, but in this instance, fame has fallen short of the truth.
You are very kind, sir.
I am very sensible, madam, of the hardship of my fair cousins, but I can assure the young ladies that I come prepared to admire them. At present, I will not say more, but perhaps when we are better acquainted. Thus, in conclusion, I may say that having a good home and good living as a clergyman, I intend to marry, and in reconciliation with your family, I propose to choose one of your daughters. Surely you will agree that this atonement is an excellent one, both generous and disinterested on my part.
Indeed.
I very much approve of your eldest.
Jane.
Indeed, I conceive her both fetching and decorous. She should do quite nicely, and seniority must be served.
Jane, sir, as to my younger daughters, I cannot take it upon myself to say, but I know of no predispositions. Concerning my eldest daughter...
Jane?
Jane.
Jane.
I feel it incumbent to say she is very likely to be soon engaged.
I see. And the next in age?
Elizabeth.
Elizabeth, yes, very forthright and not at all unpresentable.
Done.
To escape Mr. Collins' lectures.
On the high quality and moral fitness of the pastorate of the Church of England.
Papa suggested
a stroll to Meryton.
Indeed, one must first learn that the highest laws for the governance of a Christian duty.
And no sooner had I arrived at the regiment and trumpetry than 3 ensigns bowed all at once.
And discovered from within, not from without.
And all 3 asked me to walk out with them.
That no man can become a serviceable servant solely by obedience to written edicts. And though the principles elucidated...
La, said I am but one lady, as you can plainly see. When we soon espied... Oh, yeah! A newly arrived officer of the regiment. Yeah! Of most gentlemanlike appearance, who was introduced to us by an officer already of our acquaintance as...
Mr. Wickham.
His appearance was greatly in his favor. He had all the best spots of beauty. A fine countenance. A good figure. And a very pleasing address.
How do you do? This is a lucky chance indeed. At the officers' table, the Bennets are much spoken of. And all of it approbation. Miss Catherine and Miss Lydia, are you not? Wrong way around. Profoundly sorry. I hope to be correct in addressing you as Miss Elizabeth Bennet.
Yes, quite correct.
I solicit your further acquaintance, Miss Bennet.
Our society, sir, is not extensive. I venture we will meet again.
La! We were talking oh so very agreeably when the sound of horses drew our notice.
And Mr. Bingley and Darcy came riding by.
Mr. Wickham barely acknowledged them, which Mr. Darcy hardly deigned return.
What could be the meaning of it? Before walking on, we naturally enjoined Mr. Wickham to pay us a visit.
With very great pleasure indeed. Miss Bennet.
Mr. Wickham.
La! But our sister has made a conquest.
I am very fortunate in my patroness, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, who has condescended to take me in hand. What beauty! What elevated style and affability! She is, of course, the proprietress of Rosings, and a very, 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 very extensive property. Her daughter's indifferent health unhappily prevents her being in town, which, as I told Lady Catherine myself one day, has deprived the British court of its brightest ornament.
Absolutely splendid.
Mr. Wickham has arrived. Mr. George Wickham, Papa.
Pleased.
Delighted.
Parson Collins, Mr. Wickham.
Always a pleasure to meet a gentleman of the cloth. I had a near miss myself.
As Mr. Collins once again held forth.
I have more than once observed to Lady Catherine.
And Mr. Wickham suggested that I show him
Around the grounds. Please excuse my temerity in accepting your sister's kind invitation with an almost unbecoming alacrity.
It is a great kindness to seek us out. The regiment, I hope, is not unhappily quartered here?
Well, I cannot speak for the regiment, but I may say I am personally improved by acquaintance with your family.
A courtesy very prettily put.
And sincerely meant.
I cannot help noticing, sir, a certain coolness of regard in passing between yourself and Mr. Darcy.
You have a keen eye, Miss Bennet.
And a curious one, sir.
How long has Mr. Darcy been staying here?
About a month. He is a man of very large property in Derbyshire, I understand.
His estate there is a noble one. In fact, I have been connected with his family from my infancy. Are you much acquainted with him?
I have spent 4 days in the same house with him, and I think him very disagreeable.
I believe your opinion of him would in general astonish.
Really, he's not at all liked in Hertfordshire.
May I express surprise? The world is perhaps blinded by his fortune and consequence, and sees him only as he chooses to be seen.
I should take him even on my slightest acquaintance to be an ill-tempered man.
I fear I have a considerable knowledge of him. The late Mr. Darcy, his father, was excessively attached to me. I cannot do justice to his kindness. His son and I were born in the same parish, sharing the same amusements. My father was his father's estate manager. The late Mr. Darcy knew the church ought to be my profession and promised me the family parish when it came available, or, if not, made a voluntary promise of providing for me. Both were countermanded by young Mr. Darcy after his father's death.
On what grounds?
Had the late Mr. Darcy liked me less, his son might have borne with me better. But his father's uncommon attachment to me irritated him. He had not the temper to bear the sort of competition in which we stood. In short, his behavior to me has been scandalous. But I do not trust myself on the subject. I can hardly be fair to him now.
I had not thought Mr. Darcy as bad as this.
I fear almost all his actions may be traced to his considerable pride.
But can such abominable pride as his have ever done him good?
I must own him to be liberal and generous, display hospitality, assist his tenants, and relieve the poor. Family pride and filial pride have done this, but his father's preference for me has pricked that pride and made me his enemy.
I'm astonished at his intimacy with Mr. Bingley. Do you know him?
Not at all.
He is a sweet-tempered, amiable, charming man. He cannot know what Mr. Darcy is.
Mr. Darcy can please where he chooses.
My judgment would be that he deserves to be publicly disgraced.
Sometime or other, he will be, but it will not be by me, Miss Bennet. Please allow me to say, the troubling aspect of our subject has not made you a whit less delightful.
I must suppose that the relationship you describe will not allow your presence at the coming ball at Netherfield?
I would fear a discomfort for all involved. But make no mistake, Miss Bennet, I keenly feel the loss.
Well, whatever he said was well said, and whatever he did was done gracefully.
But, dear sister, I am all astonishment and concern. I know not how to believe Mr. Darcy could be so unworthy of Mr. Bingley's regard.
I can much more easily believe Mr. Bingley's being imposed on than Mr. Wickham should invent such a history of himself.
But it is so distressing. One does not know what to think.
I beg your pardon. One knows exactly what to think.
I know only with certainty that poor Mr. Bingley would have much to suffer if Wickham's charge becomes public.
Poor Mr. Bingley.
I speak only as an observer.
Back at home, Mr. Bingley and his sister arrived to give their personal invitation for the long-expected ball at Netherfield, which was fixed for the following Tuesday, while Mr. Collins...
I am by no means of the opinion, I assure you, that a ball of this kind, given by a young man of character, can have any evil tendency, and I am so far from objecting to dancing myself that I take this opportunity, Miss Elizabeth, of soliciting the first 2 dances with you especially.
I might title them dances of mortification. And it struck me that I had been selected from among my sisters as worthy of being the mistress of Hunsford Parsonage.
I perceived that Elizabeth still longed to see Mr. Wickham among those assembled.
May I hope for the next, Miss Bennet?
Well, I hardly think...
Do not be a simpleton and allow your fancy for Wickham make you appear unpleasant in the eyes of a man 10 times his consequence.
Well then.
The music is well played, do you not think? It is your turn to say something now, Mr. Darcy. I talked about the dance, and you ought to make some kind of remark on the size of the room or the number of couples.
I quite assure you that whatever you wish me to say will be said.
Very well. That reply will do for the present. Now we may be silent. I have always, Mr. Darcy, seen a great similarity in the turn of our minds. We are both of an unsocial, taciturn disposition, unwilling to speak unless we expect to say something that will amaze the whole room, and be handed down to posterity.
I am sure this is no very striking resemblance to your own character. How near it may be to mine, I cannot pretend to say.
I've recently had the pleasure of forming a new acquaintance with a childhood friend of yours, a Mr. Wickham.
Mr. Wickham is blessed with such happy manners as may ensure his making friends. Whether he is equally capable of retaining them is less certain.
He has been so unlucky as to lose your friendship, and in a manner which he is likely to suffer from all his life.
What think you of books, Miss Elizabeth?
I cannot talk of books in a ballroom. My head is full of something else. I recall your saying, Mr. Darcy, that your resentment once created was unappeasable. You're very cautious, I suppose, as to its being created.
I am.
And never allow yourself to be blinded by prejudice?
May I ask to what these questions tend?
Merely to the illustration of your character. I'm trying to make it out.
And what is your success?
I do not get on at all. I hear such different reports of you as to confuse me exceedingly.
I can readily believe that reports may vary greatly with respect to me. And I would ask, Miss Bennet, that you do not sketch my character at present. And there is reason to fear the performance would reflect no credit on either.
Ah, Mr. Darcy, you are, if I am not mistaken, the nephew of my eminent patroness, Lady Catherine de Bourgh.
You have neglected your name, sir.
Have I?
You have.
Mr. Collins, sir.
Delighted.
Excellent. Most excellent. I have no reason, I assure you, to be dissatisfied with my reception. He answered me with the utmost civility, and upon the whole, I am much pleased with him.
Though he neglected his name.
Did he?
So, Miss Eliza, I hear you are quite delighted with George Wickham. Did you know he was the son of late Mr. Darcy's steward?
I believe he so asserted.
Let me recommend you, however, as a friend, not to give implicit confidence to all his assertions. As to Mr. Darcy's using him ill, it is perfectly false. For, on the contrary, he always has been remarkably kind to him.
Well,
George Wickham has treated Mr. Darcy in a most infamous manner. I do not know the particulars, but his coming into the country at all is a most insolent thing. Considering his descent, one cannot expect much better.
His guilt and his descent appear by your account to be one and the same, for I've heard you accuse him of nothing worse than being the son of Mr. Darcy's steward, and of that I can assure you he informed me himself.
I beg your pardon. Please excuse my interference. It was kindly meant.
By heavens, you step it wonderfully.
Under your instructions, sir.
Well, that at least promises the felicity which a marriage of true affection can bestow.
Ah, Miss Bingley, I'm sure I needn't enumerate the advantages of such a match.
Mamma!
Such a comfort knowing how fond you are of Jane.
Sadly, our carriage waits. And we must go.
Ah, Miss Elizabeth, it is a great shame we footed it but once.
Quitted the house, Mamma spoke all the way home of carriages, wedding preparations, new clothes, and seeing Jane settled in Netherfield within 3 months. Oh, and Elizabeth's marriage to Mr. Collins as well.
Madam, may I solicit the honor of a private audience with your daughter Elizabeth within the course of this morning?
What? Oh, yes, I see. Oh, dear me, Mr. Collins. I am sure Lizzie will be very happy. I am sure she can have no objection. Come, Kitty. Mary.
Dear madam, do not go. Mr. Collins must excuse me. He can have nothing to say to me that anybody need not hear.
Nonsense, Lizzie. I desire you will stay where you are. Lizzie, I insist upon your staying and hearing Mr. Collins. Kitty, Mary, stay.
Your modesty adds only to your other perfections, for my attentions have been too marked to be mistaken. But before I am run away with by my feelings, I shall enumerate my reasons for marrying. First, to set the example of matrimony within my parish.
Of course.
Secondly, it greatly adds to a man's well-being. And thirdly, by the particular advice and recommendation of Lady Catherine de Bourgh, my patroness, that to be an active, useful sort of person. Her very words, your wit and vivacity, I think, must be acceptable to her, especially when tempered with the silence and respect with which her rank invariably dictates. Fourth, as I am to inherit this estate after the death of your honored father, I feel bound to choose a wife from among his daughters that the loss to them might be as little as possible. And now all that remains for me is to assure you in the most animated language of the violence of my affection.
No.
No?
I am very sensible, sir, of the honor of your proposals, but it is impossible for me to do otherwise than decline them.
Oh, it is usual with young ladies to reject at first the addresses of the man they secretly mean to accept.
I am not one of those young ladies. You could not make me happy, and I am convinced that I am the last woman in the world who would make you so. Were your friend, Lady Catherine, to know me, she would find me in every respect ill-qualified. The matter may be considered, therefore, as finally settled.
Naturally, you cannot be serious in your rejection of me. Good sense and financial necessity forbid it. It is your wish to increase my love by suspense, according to the usual practice of elegant females.
I am not, Mr. Collins, an elegant female intending to plague you. I am a rational creature speaking the truth from her heart. I will not have you. Can I speak plainer?
You are uniformly charming.
Mr. Collins, allow me to be the first to congratulate you.
She has begun delightfully with a refusal.
A refusal? Mr. Bennet! You are wanted immediately! She is a headstrong, foolish girl who does not know her own interest.
Headstrong?
But I will make her know it.
Headstrong, foolish, dear me.
Mr. Bennet! You must come and make Lizzie marry Mr. Collins, for she vows she will not have him.
Please excuse me.
I have not the pleasure of understanding you.
And Mr. Collins begins to say he will not have Lizzie. Oh, Lizzie!
And what am I to do on the occasion?
Why, tell her you insist upon her marrying him.
Come here, child. Is it true that Mr. Collins has made you an offer of marriage?
It is.
And this offer of marriage you have refused.
I have, sir.
An unhappy alternative is before you, Elizabeth. Your mother will never see you again if you do not marry Mr. Collins. And I will never see you again if you do.
I tell you what, Miss Lizzie, go on in this way and you will never get a husband at all. Oh, Mr. Collins.
Pray, excuse me, but I wish to withdraw my pretensions to your daughter's favor. I have come to feel that her high spirits may not find their perfect expression in the somewhat circumscribed life of the parsonage. I have certainly meant well, and if my behavior has been in any way reprehensible, I here beg leave to apologize. I'm resigned, but I hope improved. Resignation is never so perfect as when the blessing denied begins to lose its value and estimation.
Miss Lizzie, I shall simply say that I will never speak another word to you again, and you will find me as good as my word.
The discussion of Mr. Collins' offer was now nearly at an end, but rather than decamp in disarray, he made it known
that he was always to have gone on Saturday, and to Saturday he still meant to stay.
And the assiduous attentions paid to Lizzie were transferred to Charlotte Lucas, who is visiting. Her civility in listening to him was a seasonable relief to us all. Jane, this is from Netherfield. From Netherfield? Caroline Bingley says their whole party are leaving town without any intention of coming back again. I do not pretend to regret anything I shall leave in Hertfordshire.
Except your society, my dearest friend.
It is evident by this that Mr. Bingley comes back no more this winter.
It is only evident that Miss Bingley does not mean that he should.
I will read you the passage which particularly hurts me. I will have no reserves from you.
Mr. Darcy is impatient to see his younger sister, and, to confess the truth, we are scarcely less eager to meet her again. Georgiana has no equal for beauty, elegance, and accomplishments, and we dare entertain the hope of her being hereafter our sister.
Foolishness. She is a child.
Is it not clear enough? Does it not expressly declare that Caroline neither expects nor wishes me to be her sister, and that she is perfectly convinced of her brother's indifference to me? Can there be any other opinion on the subject?
Yes, there can, for mine is totally different. Will you hear it?
Most willingly.
It is this. Miss Bingley sees that her brother is in love with you and wants him to marry Georgiana Darcy. I also suspect that Mr. Bingley's regard has been further suppressed by his friend, Mr. Darcy's interference. He watched you most narrowly as you danced.
You must not criticize, Lizzie. Perhaps I've imagined Mr. Bingley's regard. Women fancy admiration means more than it does.
And men take care that it should. His sister has influenced him, Jane, in conjunction with his friend.
Surely she only wishes his happiness.
Oh, she may wish many things besides his happiness, such as an increase in wealth, consequence, and great connections.
No, Lizzie. I think no ill of him or his sister. Let me take it in the best light, in the light in which it may be understood. I have at least the comfort that it has not been more than an error of fancy on my side, and that it has done no harm to anyone but myself.
Really, you are too good. You wish to think all the world respectable. The more I see of the world, the more I am dissatisfied with it. And every day confirms my belief in the inconsistency of all human characters. I have come to distrust the appearance of either merit or sense.
So, Lizzie, your sister is crossed in love, I find. I congratulate her. Next to being married, a girl likes to be crossed in love a little now and then. You will hardly bear to be long outdone by Jane. There are officers enough at Meryton to disappoint all the young ladies in the country. Let Wickham be your man. He is a pleasant fellow, and would jilt you creditably.
Thank you, sir. But a less agreeable man would satisfy me. We must not all expect Jane's good fortune.
Amazement! Within this very week, and in as such a short a time as Mr. Collins' long speeches would allow, all was settled between him and Charlotte Lucas by way of
domestic arrangement.
And Lizzie feels she accepted him solely
from the pure and disinterested desire of an establishment.
And as Mamma said,
cared not how that establishment was gained.
Charlotte's marriage is unaccountable, in every view unaccountable.
My dear Lizzie, do not give way to such feelings as these. They will ruin your happiness.
Engaged to Mr. Collins. My dear Charlotte, impossible.
Why should you be so surprised, my dear Eliza? Do you think it incredible that Mr. Collins should be able to procure any woman's good opinion because he was not so happy as to succeed with you?
Indeed not, but 2 offers of marriage in 3 days?
My dear Eliza, I'm sure that when you have had time to think it over, you will be satisfied for me. Not romantic, you know. I never was. You must come and visit the parsonage as soon as you can.
And I tell you, Mr. Collins has been taken in. Worse, Elizabeth, I am sure, is the cause of all this mischief.
No.
I tell you, we are in a pitiable state. Because of the entail, Charlotte Lucas will be mistress of this house, and I shall be forced to make way for her and live to see her take my place in it.
Let us hope for better things. Let us flatter ourselves that I may be the survivor.
in our gloom, Mr. Wickham's society was of material service, and his betrayal by Mr. Darcy was general knowledge. We all agreed that
Mr. Darcy was the worst of men. On Monday, the Gardiners, my mother's brother and his wife, arrived. He is a sensible, gentlemanlike man, and Mrs. Gardiner, as always, enlivened the premises by distributing presents, describing the newest fashions, and giving sage advice.
A young man, such as you describe Mr. Bingley, so easily falls in love with a pretty girl for a few weeks, and just as easily forgets her. Now, as to Mr. Wickham, whom you mention far too frequently, I would have you be on your guard.
Oh, he shall not be in love with me if I can prevent it.
Do not involve yourself in an affection which the want of fortune should make very imprudent.
At present, I am not in love with Mr. Wickham, but I count him as the most agreeable man I ever saw.
Unwise.
All I can promise you, therefore, is not to be in a hurry.
I say no more. I shall take Jane with me to London, poor girl, as a change of scene might be of service. It had better have happened to you, Lizzie. You would have laughed yourself out of it sooner. I understand you are to visit the Collinses in their newly married state, and you must visit me as well.
As March was to take me to Hunsford Parsonage, the prospect of spending a night in London made the plan perfect as plan could be. Jane, look now, I see London is agreeable to you.
My dearest Lizzie, sit with me.
With every pleasure. You look so well.
I confess myself to have been entirely deceived in Miss Bingley's regard for me. She has barely visited me here in London, and when she did come, it was very evident she had no pleasure in it. In fact, she seemed to have come to convince me of her brother's interest in Miss Darcy.
It is said that Mr. Wickham is now the admirer of a certain Miss King.
Oh.
Whose most remarkable charm, I might add, seems to be the acquisition of £10,000 through a death in the family, and is at the least indelicate to direct his attentions toward her so soon after this event. You are pale, Elizabeth. Are you ill?
A man in distressed circumstances has not the time for the elegant decorums which others might observe. If she does not object to it, why should we?
Her not objecting to it does not justify him.
I have a very poor opinion of young men who live in Derbyshire, and their intimate friends who live in Hertfordshire are not much better. I am sick of them all. Thank heaven I am going tomorrow to the Collins Parsonage, where I shall meet a man who has not one agreeable quality, who has neither merit nor sense to recommend him. Perhaps stupid men are the only ones worth knowing after all.
Bravo! You must accompany Mr. Gardiner and myself on a tour pleasure this summer, where we shall avoid men altogether and regard the landscape.
Oh, my dear aunt, what delight, what felicity! You give me fresh life and vigor. Adieu to disappointment and bitterness. What are men to rocks and mountains? Every object on my next day's journey was new and exciting, the weather delightful, the chaise comfortable, and all conspired for the pleasure of the traveller. At length, the parsonage was discernible, and Mr. Collins and Charlotte appeared at the gate.
My dearest Eliza, you are welcome. And then welcome again. Come in immediately. You must be wearied and jostled.
I have news of Lady Catherine's delicate consideration and civility in inviting us to dine at Rosings the next night but one. Do not make yourself uneasy, my dear cousin, about your apparel. Lady Catherine will not think the worse of you for being simply dressed.
The dinner was exceedingly handsome, and there were all the servants and each article of plate which Mr. Collins had promised and elaborately described.
You must not be surprised that Mr. Darcy will be in attendance, bringing with him a Colonel Fitzwilliam, the younger son of his uncle.
It is my pleasure to introduce the Right Honourable Lady Catherine de Bourgh, my patroness, whose wit, affability, and condescension...
Yes, quite so. You are, I believe, Elizabeth Bennet.
I am.
Your father's estate is entailed on Mr. Collins, I think. For your sake, I am glad of it, but otherwise I see no reason for entailing estates from the female line. A word, Mr. Collins.
Miss Bennet, I had not hoped to meet you here.
Nor I.
Allow me to present Colonel Fitzwilliam.
Your beauty, oft reported, exceeds Miss Bennet.
This has not been true, Colonel Fitzwilliam, in all quarters.
Do you think it's going well?
Miss Bennet, your family?
My family?
How many sisters have you, Miss Bennet?
I have 4 sisters.
That is a great many. Are you the eldest?
I'm the second.
Are your sisters handsome?
Indeed.
Do they play and sing? Do you draw?
No, not at all.
None of you? Has your governess left you?
We never had a governess.
What? 5 daughters brought up at home without a governess? How was that possible? I never heard of such a thing. Your mother must have been quite a slave to your education.
Not perhaps as you might think.
Then who taught you? Who attended to you?
Those of us as wished to learn never wanted the means. We were always encouraged to read, and books were always provided. Those of us as chose to be idle certainly might.
Yes, but that is what a governess will prevent. Had I known your mother, I should have advised her most strenuously to engage one. Are any of your younger sisters out?
Yes, ma'am, all.
All? All 5 out at once? Very odd. The younger ones out before the eldest are married.
But really, ma'am, I think it would be very hard on younger sisters not to have their share of amusement and society simply because the elder ones not have the means or inclination to marry early.
Upon my word, you give your opinion very decidedly for so young a person. Pray, what is your age?
With 3 younger sisters grown up, your ladyship can hardly expect me to own it.
What is that, Fitzwilliam? What are you telling Miss Bennet?
We are speaking of music, madam.
Of music? Then pray, speak aloud.
I'm just reminding Miss Bennet of her earlier promise to favor us at the pianoforte.
Ah, yes. Pray excuse me. I fear you will not find me a great proficient. Pray, continue your conversation rather than attend me.
I often tell young ladies that no excellence in music is to be acquired without constant practice.
You mean to frighten me, Mr. Darcy, but my courage always rises with every attempt to intimidate me.
You could not really believe me to entertain any design of alarming you. I have had the pleasure of your acquaintance long enough to know that you find great enjoyment in occasionally professing opinions, which in fact are not your own.
Your cousin will give you a very pretty notion of me and teach you not to believe a word I say. Take care, sir, for you're provoking me to retaliate, and such things may come out as will shock your relations to hear.
I am not afraid of you.
Pray, let me hear what you accuse him of. I should like to know how a paragon behaves among strangers.
You shall hear then, but prepare yourself for something very dreadful. The first time of ever my meeting him was at a ball, and he refused to dance. And more than one young lady was sitting down in want of a partner.
I had not at the time the pleasure of knowing any lady in the assembly, and I am ill-qualified to recommend myself to strangers.
Shall we ask him why a man of sense and education who has lived in the world is ill-qualified to recommend himself to strangers?
I have not the talent of conversing easily with those I have never seen before.
Well, fortunately for all present, that is not the case here. Shortly and unexpectedly after our delightful evening at Lady Catherine's, the two cousins came often of an afternoon to the parsonage. It was evident that Colonel Fitzwilliam came because he enjoyed Charlotte's and my society, but why Mr. Darcy came so often was more difficult to understand.
If you would not laugh me to scorn, Eliza, I might suggest the possibility of his being partial to you.
The gentleman seldom meets my eyes and often sits there 10 minutes together without opening his lips.
Ah, but he often looks at you quite appraisingly when your look is elsewhere engaged.
Stuff. I'm going for a ramble in the park.
Ah, Miss Bennet.
Colonel Fitzwilliam, I did not know you ever walked this way.
Are you going much further?
No, I should have turned in a moment. Do you certainly leave Kent on Saturday?
Yes, if Darcy does not put it off again.
I do not know anybody who more enjoys the power of doing what he likes than Mr. Darcy.
But so do we all. It is only that he has better means of having it than others, and I am at his disposal.
I suppose your cousin brought you down with him for the sake of having somebody at his disposal. I wonder he does not marry to secure a lasting convenience of that kind. But I suppose his sister does for the present, as she is under his sole care.
In fact, I am joined with him in the guardianship of Miss Darcy.
Are you indeed? Young ladies of her age are sometimes a little difficult to manage, and if she has true Darcy spirit, she may like to have her own way.
But no, she is one of the most tractable creatures in the world, and a great favorite of Miss Bingley. I think I have heard you say you know her.
A little. Mr. Darcy is uncommonly kind to Mr. Bingley and takes a prodigious deal of care of him.
From something Darcy said, I have reason to think Bingley very much indebted to him. It is a matter which Darcy could not wish to be generally known, because if it were to get round to the lady's family, it would be an unpleasant thing.
You may of course depend on my not mentioning it.
He merely told me that he congratulated himself on recently saving a friend from the inconveniences of a most imprudent marriage. And I only suspected it to be Bingley, as his open nature might get him into a scrape of that sort.
Forgive me, but I do not see what right Mr. Darcy had to determine the propriety of a friend's inclination.
As I recall, there were some very strong objections to the lady's family. One with the country attorney, another with a sort of mercantile background, and perhaps an unsuitable mother. But this is all conjecture. Good day to you, Miss Bennet.
Towards Jane herself there could be no possibility of objection, oh, loveliness and goodness as she is. Neither could anything be urged against my father, who, though with some peculiarities, has abilities Mr. Darcy himself need not disdain. Of course, my mother. But Mr. Darcy would suffer a greater wound from the want of his friends' importance than from their want of sense. He has been governed by this worst kind of pride, and partly from the wish of retaining Mr. Bingley for his sister.
Miss Bennet.
Mr. Darcy.
Would it be suitable if I inquired of your health?
My health?
As I've not encountered you these past days, I thought I come to inquire of your health.
My health, Mr. Darcy, meets all the usual standards.
Ah.
Yes.
Ah. In vain have I struggled. It will not do. My feelings will not be repressed. You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you. I see I dismay you. I should have declared myself at an earlier date. But there were, of course, the family obstacles which judgment always opposed to inclination, the general sense of your social inferiority, of it being a degradation of the line. I could not forget my responsibility to an estate, a way of life, a pride of place which might, given your circumstances, disinclude you. And thus the very ardency I described took place against my will and reason, or rather in opposition to my character and inclination. But the very strength of my attachment has made it impossible for me to conquer my feelings. And I can only express the hope that my feelings will now be rewarded by your acceptance of my hand. There. I have spoken ill, but mean well, Miss Bennet.
In such cases as this, it is, I believe, the established mode to express a sense of obligation for the sentiments avowed, however unequally they may be returned. It is natural that obligation should be felt, and if I could feel gratitude, I would now thank you. But I cannot. I have never desired your good opinion, and you have certainly bestowed it most unwillingly. The feelings which you tell me have long prevented the acknowledgement of your regard can have little difficulty in overcoming it after this explanation.
And this is all the reply which I am to have the honor of expecting? I might, perhaps, wish to be informed why, with so little endeavor at civility, I am thus rejected.
And I might as well inquire why, with so obvious a design of offending and insulting me, you chose to tell me that you liked me against your will, against your reason, and even against your character. Was this not some excuse for incivility if I was uncivil? But I have other provocations. You know I have. Do you think any consideration would tempt me to accept the man who has been the means of ruining, perhaps forever, the happiness of a beloved sister? You divided Mr. Bingley and Jane from each other, or at the very least yours was the principal means, involving them both in the misery of the acutest kind. Can you deny that you have done it?
I have no wish to deny that I did everything in my power to separate my friend from your sister, or that I rejoice in my success. Towards him I have been kinder than towards myself.
Quite clearly said. But it is not merely this affair on which my dislike is founded. Your character was unfolded in the recital which I received many months ago from Mr. Wickham.
You take an eager interest in that gentleman's concern.
Knowing his misfortunes, who would not feel interest in him?
His misfortunes?
And of your infliction. You have withheld the advantages which you must know to have been designed for him. And yet you treat the mention of his misfortunes with contempt?
And this is your opinion of me. I thank you for explaining it so fully.
The mode of your declaration has not affected me, Mr. Darcy. You could not have made me the offer of your hand in any possible way that would have tempted me to accept it. From the very beginning, your arrogance and selfish disdain for the feelings of others had built an immovable dislike. You are, Mr. Darcy, the last man in the world whom I could ever be prevailed upon to marry.
You have said quite enough, madam. I perfectly comprehend your feelings. Forgive me for having taken up so much of your time, and accept my best wishes for your health and happiness.
We will now be having a 15-minute intermission. There is also free water bottles in the lobby. Thank you.
Next morning I awoke to the same thoughts that had kept sleep long at bay, and resolved to see what air and exercise might do for my meditations, thus proceeded to my favorite walk.
I have been wandering in the grove some time in the hope of meeting you. Will you do me the honor of reading this letter? Two offenses you last night laid to my charge.
First,
that I had detached Mr. Bingley from your sister.
And the other,
that I had, in defiance of honor, blasted the prospects of Mr. Wickham.
Ah, Miss Bennet, you are well known in Hertfordshire.
I had not been long in Hertfordshire before I observed Bingley's behavior and perceived his most surprising partiality.
Will you think me too forward if I apply to you for a second dance?
Your sister I also watched.
And though her manners were open and engaging, there was no symptom of warm regard or sentiment. She received his attentions, but remained,
to my eye, indifferent. My objections to the marriage proceeded also from other causes of repugnance. Your family's want of propriety betrayed by your mother's manners, your younger sister's forwardness, and even, forgive me, your father's misplaced wit, all confirmed my sense
that I must preserve my friend from a most unhappy connection.
In London, I found his sister's uneasiness
has been greatly excited,
and we were alike sensible that no time should be lost in detaching him. Mr. Bingley has a great natural modesty, with a stronger dependence on my judgment than on his own.
To convince him he had deceived himself was not difficult.
On this subject, I have nothing more to say, and no apology to offer. With respect to that other, more weighty accusation of having injured Mr. Wickham, that I will attempt to refute.
In short, his behavior to me has been scandalous.
My father was not only fond of this young man's society, but hoped the church would be his profession.
And intended to provide for him in it. He would situate him at the family parsonage and provide a legacy of £1,000. After my father's death, Mr. Wickham wrote to inform me
that I have decided not to pursue a church living, but to study law, for which the £1,000 would be insufficient. I hope you shall not think it unreasonable of me to assume more immediate pecuniary advantage.
The business was soon settled. He resigned all claim to assistance in the church.
And accepted in return £3,000. 3 years later, he applied to me again, having found the law an unprofitable study, and being then again resolved to be ordained.
This must be false. This cannot be.
He assured me his circumstances
were exceedingly bad.
Indeed, on both sides, this is only an assertion, and yet every line confuses my belief in Mr. Darcy's infamy.
You will hardly blame me for refusing his entreaty, and his resentment was so great.
You betray your father's wishes and your own honor, sir.
That every appearance of acquaintance was dropped. Last summer, he again most painfully obtruded on my notice. My sister Georgiana, for whom Mr. Fitzwilliam and myself are mutual guardians,
was taken from school at her wish and established in London. Mr. Wickham, by connivance, recommended himself to her.
Ah, Miss Darcy, it is a pleasure to renew your acquaintance.
She was then but 15, and was persuaded to believe herself in love, and consented to an elopement.
Fortunately, regarding me as almost a second father, she confessed her plans.
You may imagine what I felt and how I acted.
I wrote to Mr. Wickham in undisguised heat, and he left London immediately, and alone. His chief object had unquestionably been my sister's fortune of £30,000, and the hope, I think, of revenging himself on me. This, madam, is a faithful narrative of every event. If your abhorrence of me should make my assertions valueless, I direct you to Colonel Fitzwilliam, also guardian of Georgiana, who is fully aware of every particular described above. I will only add, God bless you.
How humiliating is this discovery, yet how just a humiliation. Had I been in love, I could not have been more wretchedly blind, but vanity, not love, has been my folly. As to the mention of my family in terms so mortifying, my sense of shame is severe, but the charge strikes too forcibly for denial. Their defects, I fear, seem hopeless of remedy. My mother puts herself forward beyond all expectation. And my father does nothing to restrain the uncontrollable giddiness and self-willed carelessness of my younger sisters.
Mine!
Only excepting dear Jane, what can I call them all but ignorant, idle, and vain? Despicably I have acted. I who have prided myself on my discernment. Till this moment, I never knew myself.
I'm glad you are back, Lizzie.
Have you had any flirting? I was in great hopes that you would have got a husband before you got back.
Our sisters have been more than ordinarily silly.
Oh, pooh! Aunt Philip says Lizzie had better take in Mr. Collins, but I do not think there would have been any fun in it. Jane will be quite an old maid soon. How I should like to be married before any of you. Then I should chaperone you about to all the balls. Kitty and I have gone to the shops.
I do wish you had gone along with us, Mary, for we had such fun. We talked and laughed so loud that anybody might have heard us 10 miles off.
Far be it from me, my dear sister, to depreciate such pleasures. But I confess, they would have no charms for me. I should infinitely prefer a book.
Look here, I have bought this bonnet. I do not think it is very pretty, but I thought I might as well buy it as not.
You see?
Oh, but there are 2 or 3 much uglier in the shop, and when I have bought some prettier colored satin to trim it with fresh, I think it will be very tolerable.
Sister, I'm heartily sorry that Mr. Darcy should have delivered his sentiments in a manner so little suited to recommend them, but I grieve for the unhappiness your refusal must have given him.
You do not, however, blame me for refusing him.
Blame you? Oh, no. But Wickham is so very bad, it is almost past belief. How unfortunate that you should have used such very strong expressions in speaking of Wickham to Mr. Darcy, for now they do appear wholly undeserved.
Well, Lizzie, what is your opinion now of this business of Jane's?
My belief...
He is a very undeserving young man, and I do not believe she shall ever get him now.
Mamma.
Well, my comfort is, I am sure Jane will die of a broken heart, and then he will be sorry for what he has done.
News! Ecstatic! Delicious!
Wonderful!
News!
Hearing the regiment would leave for Brighton.
I thought my heart should have broken.
My heart.
Mine. But oh, Mamma, I received an invitation for Mrs. Forster, the wife of the colonel of the regiment, to accompany her to
Brighton.
To Brighton.
Oh. And I cannot see why I should not be asked as well. Shall.
You confuse your steps to the Danse Espagnole, and you have but one dress for the new season, and that in unsuitable green.
Lydia will never be easy till she has exposed her qualities in some public place or other, and we can never expect her to do it with such little expense or inconvenience as under the present circumstances.
Oh, Papa!
Were you aware of the very great inconvenience which must arise from the public notice of Lydia's unguarded and imprudent manner, nay, which has already arisen from it?
What? Has she frightened away some of your suitors?
I have no such injuries to resent, but dear father, if there is no check to her exuberant spirits, I fear she will soon be beyond the reach of amendment.
Oh, Pooh!
Yes, Pooh.
And Kitty will follow wherever Lydia leads.
Papa said I may.
Where you may play the common flirt with at least 6 officers at once.
We shall have no peace at Longbourn if Lydia does not go to Brighton.
Mr. Wickham has arrived to say his goodbyes as the regiment tomorrow decamps for Brighton.
But Mr. Wickham, I should not say my goodbyes, for Papa's agreed I may accept Mrs. Forster's invitation for an extended visit.
I will be pleased, if asked, to introduce you in Brighton and share the town's historical views. Miss Bennet.
Mr. Wickham.
Am I in disgrace, Miss Bennet?
I do not rightly understand you.
I have always admired your understanding.
Have I mentioned that I met Colonel Fitzwilliam and Mr. Darcy while at Rosings? You know Colonel Fitzwilliam, I believe.
In passing, you saw Mr. Darcy frequently?
Yes, almost every day. I believe he improves on acquaintance.
Indeed. And is it in address he improves? For I dare not hope he's improved in essentials.
I mean that from knowing him better, his disposition was better understood.
Well, I must rejoice that he is wise enough at least to assume even the appearance of what is right. For it must deter him from such foul misconduct as I have suffered by. But I fear I must leave you. We are on the march. A last word on Mr. Darcy. His manners being in a state of improvement may be imputed to his wish of forwarding with his newfound affability a match with the daughter of Lady Catherine de Bourgh. A match long contemplated by both families as a boon to the continuance of their honorable lines and the growth of their estates. Goodbye, Miss Bennet. I am not sure we will meet again, but I wish you good fortune in whatever way your inclinations lie.
The departure of the regiment, including many acquaintances, wrapped a cloak of gloom and disinclination around our domestic circle.
Lydia has promised to write very often, but her letters are always very short.
Where such and such officers had attended them.
Where she had seen such beautiful ornaments as made her quite wild.
And how she had purchased another new gown and another new parasol.
And my constant hope of a tour to the lakes with the gardeners was now the object of my happiest thoughts.
My dear Elizabeth, our plans, due to Mr. Gardiner's business, must be somewhat curtailed in extent. We must give up the lakes and substitute a more contracted tour. Had you such a heart on seeing the lakes?
Well, I own they were an attraction.
I fear we're confined to Derbyshire, though it leaves the delights of Warwick, Kenilworth, Lambton, and of course Pemberley.
Oh, Pemberley.
The Darcy estate?
Yes, I recall.
If it were merely a fine house, richly furnished, I should not care about it myself. But the grounds are delightful.
The grounds, yes. But is not the family down for the summer?
Indeed not, you goose, for they summer always in London. Elizabeth.
The journey was, for scenery, splendid, and when we turned in at the lodge, we saw that Pemberley Park was quite extensive.
Contains quite a variety of grounds.
Glorious woods.
Eh?
Woods.
Good stream for fishing. Oh, there.
You are very welcome. The master is, of course, absent, but we expect him tomorrow with a large party of friends. We are instructed always to show the house, if you would like.
Most kind indeed.
Your master much at Pemberley, is he?
Not so much as I could wish. Please, step in. That, above the grand fireplace, would be my master, drawn perhaps 8 years ago.
A handsome face. But Lizzie, you can tell us whether it is like or not.
Does the young lady know Mr. Darcy?
I do.
And do you not think him a very handsome gentleman, ma'am?
Yes, very handsome.
He is the best master as has ever lived. I have never had a cross word from him in my life.
Mr. Darcy, you mean?
Yes, ma'am. Go as you please. See what you like.
In what an amiable light does this now place him, though not quite consistent with his behavior to a poor friend.
It is possible we are deceived. Perhaps, Aunt, we may view the grounds.
Ah, with the greatest pleasure. Indeed, the lawn, the landscape, the river, all in harmony with the buildings. I am quite swept away.
Oh.
Oh.
Ah.
Miss Bennet, this is a most welcome surprise.
Indeed, most welcome.
Might I inquire of your well-being and that of your family?
In all regards, well.
I am very pleased to hear so. Would you do me the honor of introducing me to your friends?
Oh, Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner, may I present Mr. Darcy?
Charmed.
Delighted.
My uncle and aunt.
Of course, that only adds to the pleasure.
Wonderful stream, Mr. Darcy. Capital angling, I suspect?
Quite satisfactory, Mr. Gardiner. Should you continue in the neighborhood, please do me the honor of fishing here as often as you choose.
Very generous, sir. Look forward to it.
Very generous indeed.
Please exempt of forwardness in walking the grounds. Your housekeeper informed us you would certainly not be here until tomorrow.
I have preceded my party to arrange their comfort. Among them are some who will claim acquaintance with you. Mr. Bingley and his sister, and one who more particularly wishes to be known to you. Will you allow me to introduce my sister to your acquaintance during your stay at Lambton?
I am delighted by this compliment.
Ah.
Yes.
Great pleasure.
Perfectly well behaved, polite, and unassuming.
There is something a little aloof in him. To be sure, Lizzie, he is not handsome, but his features are perfectly good. How came you to tell us he was so disagreeable?
Well...
Disagreeable.
Indeed not. At the worst, a little whimsical in civilities.
The meetings and introductions suggested by Mr. Darcy took place 2 days following and excited my lively attention. I had conceived, you might say, a suspicion of Mr. Darcy and my niece, which, on that occasion, grew to a full conviction that one of them, at the least, knew what it was to love. Of Lizzie's sensations I remained a little in doubt, but that the gentleman was overflowing with admiration was evident enough.
Thus, dearest Jane, in speaking of your supposed rival, Miss Darcy, I saw no looks pass between her and Mr. Bingley that spoke of particular regard. He also asked me with great interest if all my sisters were still at Longbourn, which I took to be an enquiry as to your married state. Miss Bingley continues in her dislike of me. Georgiana Darcy is greatly civil, but very shy.
Something come for you, miss.
Oh.
Thought you might be wanting it.
News from Jane, and very welcome. My dearest Lizzie, something has occurred of a most serious and unexpected nature.
Colonel Forster informed us that Lydia has run up to Scotland one of his officers. To own the truth, Lizzie, it is with Wickham.
Worse still.
Imprudent as a marriage between Wickham and our poor Lydia would be.
We are now frantic to be assured that it has taken place at all, for we now hear that they are not gone to Scotland, but to London.
And there is reason to believe
that he never intended to marry Lydia at all.
And Colonel Forster
fears Wickham is not a man to be trusted.
Father is going to London with Colonel Forster to try to discover her. In what he means to do, I know not.
He shall shoot the scoundrel through the heart, and we will all be ruined.
Adieu. I cannot help earnest begging you
to come as soon as possible. Oh, where is my aunt? I must find her immediately on business that cannot be delayed.
What is the matter?
I have not an instant to lose.
I will send a servant. You cannot go yourself.
No,
You are very ill.
No, only dreadful news. My younger sister has left all her friends, has eloped under the power of Mr. Wickham. You know him too well to doubt the rest. She is lost forever.
I am grieved, shocked. But is it absolutely certain?
Certain. My father has gone to London, and I am sure Mr. Gardiner will assist, but how is such a man to be worked on? How are they even to be discovered?
If there is anything...
Most kind, but...
Would to heaven that anything could be said or done on my part to offer consolation to such distress.
We must go at once. Pray, apologize for us to Miss Darcy.
Dear me, your company seems to have fled the grounds in disarray.
Your pardon?
How very ill Eliza Bennet looked this morning, Mr. Darcy. I never in my life saw anyone so much altered as she is since the winter. She has grown so brown and coarse.
It is perhaps no miraculous consequence of traveling in the summer.
I particularly recollect your saying one night, she, a beauty, I should soon call her mother a wit. But afterwards she seemed to improve on you. I believe you thought her rather pretty at one time.
Yes, but that was only when I first knew her. For I now consider her the handsomest woman of my acquaintance.
Oh.
I had not perceived while I was in Hertfordshire that Lydia had any partiality for Wickham, but that she only wanted encouragement to attach herself to anybody. Oh, the mischief of neglect and mistaken indulgence towards such a girl. A family so deranged, a father absent, a mother incapable of exertion. And it is all my fault that, knowing what I did of Mr. Wickham, that I had not the foresight to make that knowledge public. Has anything been heard of the fugitives?
Not yet, but now that my dear uncle has come, I hope all will be well.
Is father in London?
Yes, he went on Tuesday.
If I had been able to carry my point in going to Brighton with all the family, this would never have happened. Why did the Forsters let her out of their sight?
Mamma.
And now Mr. Bennet will fight Wickham wherever he meets him. Oh, I do not know what we shall do.
Eh?
Not know what we shall do.
Do not give way to useless alarm. I shall go to London, call my brother, and consult together what is to be done.
This is a most unfortunate affair, but we must stem the tide of malice and pour forth into the wounded bosoms of each other the balm of sisterly consolation.
You see, Mary thinks it's all a book.
Lydia wrote saying if we knew where she was going.
You would laugh. What a good joke it will be when I write to Mamma and sign my name, Lydia Wickham. I hope you will drink to our good journey.
Thoughtless, thoughtless Lydia. But at least it shows that she was serious in the object of her journey. Whatever he might afterwards persuade her to, it was not on her side a scheme of infamy. Oh, my poor father, how he must have felt it.
I never saw anyone so shocked. He could not speak a word.
Mr. Bennet shocked? I was taken ill immediately. Indeed, I had to be carried to my room twice.
Oh, Jane.
Father.
Mr. Bennet. Oh, my dear Mr. Bennet.
Oh, my father, what you must have endured.
It has been my own doing, and I ought to feel it.
You must not be too severe upon yourself.
No, Lizzie. Let me, once in my life, realize how much I have been to blame. Or perhaps I will defer it till Kitty runs away.
I am not going to run away, Papa. If I should ever go to Brighton, I would behave far better than Lydia.
Do you suppose them to be in London?
Yes, where else could they be so well concealed?
No, in London.
Oh, indeed, I have palpitations. Oh.
I have seen them both.
Thank heaven.
They are not married, nor can I find there was any intention of being so.
Water!
However, I hope it will not be long before they are.
Not long! Oh, see there, she is a good girl. Not long!
Hush, Mrs. Bennet.
All that is required of you is to assure your daughter, by settlement, her equal share of £5,000 secured among your children after your decease.
And enter into an engagement of allowing her, during your life, £100 per annum?
Is it possible? Can it be possible he will marry her?
So, Wickham is not so undeserving as we have thought him.
But the terms, I suppose, must be complied with.
Exactly. You must write on the moment, Mr. Bennet. They must marry.
And write I will, but there are two things I want very much to know. How much money your uncle has laid down to bring it about, and how I am ever to pay him.
Money? My uncle? What do you mean, sir?
I mean that no man in his senses would marry Lydia for 100 a year during my life, and 50 after I am gone. Wickham's a fool if he takes Lydia for a farthing less than £10,000.
And Mr. Gardiner could pay such a sum.
Indeed, he could not, nor I repay it.
You must write, Mr. Bennet. Inscribe this minute. Oh, this is delightful indeed. She will be married. My good, kind brother. I long to see her and dear Wickham too.
Dear Wickham.
But the clothes, the wedding clothes, we must see to it. I will make the arrangements myself. Ring the bell, Kitty. We must have the carriage. My dear, dear Lydia, how merry we shall be when we are together again. Calico, muslin, cambric, I will manage it all.
Mr. Gardiner wrote that Wickham had resolved on quitting the militia, but would enter into the regular army, and under the command of General Trott, now quartered in the north.
After our sister's wedding day, the couple returned to Longbourn,
and the family assembled to receive them.
Congratulate me, sisters! It is a great while since I've been here. Good gracious! When I went away, I am sure I had no idea of being married, though I thought it would be very good fun if I was. Dear Jane, I take your place now, and you must go lower, because I am a married woman. And what do you think of my husband? Isn't he the most charming man? All my sisters must go to Brighton, for that is the place to get husbands.
I thank you for my share of the favor, but I do not particularly like your way of getting husbands.
Ah, you are so strange, but I must tell you how it went off. We were married, you know, at St. Clement's, because Wickham's lodgings were in that parish, and it was settled that we should all be there by 11 o'clock. Well, just as the carriage came to the door, my uncle was called away on business, and I was so frightened that the wedding must needs be put off. But then I recollected Mr. Darcy would do just as well to give me away.
Mr. Darcy?
Give you away?
He was to come next Wickham, you know. But gracious me, I quite forgot. I ought not to have said a word. It was to be such a secret.
It was to be a secret. Say not another word.
Indeed, we will ask no questions.
Indeed, for then I should tell all, and Wickham would be so angry. Coming, Mamma.
But are my suspicions concerning Mr. Darcy's actions correct?
Lizzie, really, if you are indeed so innocent and ignorant, I must be more explicit.
Oh, dear.
Mr. Darcy called to tell Mr. Gardiner that he found out where Wickham and your sister were. Mr. Darcy professed it was owing to himself that Wickham's worthlessness had not been well known. He called it his duty to step forward and remedy the evil caused.
But not brought on by himself. Lydia was...
Lydia, indeed. He called on her, but found her resolved on remaining.
Lydia would be Lydia still.
Mr. Darcy then asked why he did not marry your sister at once.
Because we are not rich.
Indeed, Wickham still cherished the hope of making his fortune by marriage in some other country. Mr. Darcy then settled upon him a large sum for his acquiescence.
I knew it.
And made Mr. Gardiner acquainted with it. Lizzie, where are you going?
To speak with father.
This must go, Lizzie, no further than yourself or Jane at most. Mr. Darcy wants neither the act nor the sum known.
But you have told me.
I have. Yes.
Miss Bennet, I fear I interrupt your solitary ramble.
You do, yes.
Ah,
But it does not follow that the interruption should be unwelcome.
I should be very sorry indeed if it were. I hear from your aunt you have seen Pemberley. And you saw the old housekeeper, I suppose.
Yes.
And what did she say?
That you were gone into the army and she feared had not turned out well.
I see. Did Mr. Darcy introduce you to his sister?
He did.
And do you like her?
Very much.
I hope she will turn out well.
I dare say she will. She has got over the most trying age.
You think ill of me, do you not, Miss Elizabeth?
I am very glad you have married my sister, Mr. Wickham.
You are a generous spirit, sister.
He is as fine a fellow as I ever saw. He simpers and smirks and flirts with us all.
I often think there is nothing so bad as parting with friends. One seems so forlorn without them.
This is the consequence, madam, of marrying a daughter. It must make you better satisfied that your other four are single.
Mr. Bingley is coming down, Mamma.
Oh, wonderful news! I mean, he is nothing to us, and I am sure I never want to see him again. But he is welcome to Netherfield, and who knows what might happen.
I assure you that the news does not affect me with either pleasure or pain.
If he wants our society, let him seek it. He knows where we live.
But you will wait on him, of course.
I will not spend my hours running after neighbors every time they go away and come back again.
I begin to worry that he comes at all. I could see him with a perfect indifference, but I can hardly bear it to hear it thus perpetually talked of. My mother means well, but she does not know, no one can know, how much I suffer from what she says.
I wish I could say anything to comfort you, but it is wholly out of my power.
Mr. Bingley has entered the paddock and is riding toward the house.
Do you contradict yourself with a smile of expectation?
Let me first see how he behaves. It will then be early enough for expectation.
And there is a man with him, Mamma.
Oh, some acquaintance or other, my dear. I am sure I do not know.
Law, it looks just like that tall, the tall, proud man.
Good gracious, Mr. Darcy! And so it does, I vow. Well, any friend of Mr. Bingley's will always be welcome here, to be sure. But else, I must say, I hate the very sight of him.
Mr. Darcy?
The gentlemen were received with tolerable ease and propriety.
Mr. Bingley, it is a long time since you went away.
Good gracious, yes. Far too long, in my own opinion.
I began to be afraid that you would never come back again.
Mrs. Bennet.
Miss Lucas is married and well settled, and one of my own daughters.
A matter for the greatest congratulation.
It is a delightful thing indeed to have a daughter well married. Mr. Wickham has taken her down to Newcastle, a place far too northward in my estimation.
Indeed. Excellent shooting this season, eh, Darcy?
When you have killed all your own birds, Mr. Bingley, I beg you will come and kill all of ours. You are a visit in my debt, Mr. Bingley, for when you went to town last winter, you promised to take a family dinner with us as soon as you returned. I have not forgot, you see.
To be remedied at the first opportunity. Eh, Darcy?
You have been quite silent, Mr. Darcy. I hope you are well.
Quite well. Very well.
And then they went away.
Why, if Mr. Darcy came only to be silent, grave, and indifferent, did he come at all?
Now that this first meeting is over, I feel perfectly easy. Obviously, on both sides, we met only as common and indifferent acquaintances.
Jane, take care.
My dear Lizzie, you cannot think me so weak as to be in danger now.
I think you are in very great danger of making Mr. Bingley as much in love with you as ever. A man who has been once refused. How could I ever be foolish enough to expect a renewal of his love? Is there one among them who would not protest against such a weakness as a second proposal to the same woman? There is no indignity so abhorrent to their feelings.
Mr. Bingley called again on Friday.
Having once set on this road to happiness, there was nothing on the side of prudence to stop him, or make his progress slow.
He called again the following Tuesday.
She was, of course, only too good for him, but as no one minds having what is too good for them, he was very earnest in the pursuit of this blessing.
And yet again Thursday a week.
I begin to think there is something in this, Jane.
And it was not possible that encouragement from Jane should be long wanting.
Mr. Bingley is coming down, Mamma, and he looks quite serious.
Ah, Mr. Bingley, what a memorable surprise.
What is the matter, Mamma? What do you keep winking at me for?
I did not wink at you. Come, Kitty, Mary, I want you upstairs.
Mr. Bingley, you write excellently.
Elizabeth, I wish to consult you as to the... I wish to speak with you.
My dear Miss Bennet, I say, might I venture your given name?
Indeed you might, if I might venture yours.
Oh, smashing! Top of the hill, really? My dear Jane, I wish to express to you how very great is my esteem for you.
I see.
By heavens, esteem won't do. I must say affection. I really must. My dear Miss Bennet. Jane. If you would do me the honor...
I will. I have a very full heart. But perhaps before fuller expression, you might prefer a word with my father.
Your father? Well, this is top of the hill, really, and no mistaking. I'll speak with him this very moment, if available. Promise me you won't move so much as a ribbon.
I will endeavor to be very, very still. Oh, dear. Lizzie! Lizzie!
Lizzie, what?
'Tis too much. By far too much. I do not deserve it. Oh, why is everybody not as happy?
Catch! A veritable catch, my dear! I am ecstatic!
You are a good girl. I have not a doubt of your doing well together. You are, each of you, so complying that nothing will ever be resolved, so easy that every servant will cheat you, and so generous that you will always exceed your income.
Exceed their income? My dear Mr. Bennet, what are you talking of? Why, he has 4,000 or 5,000 a year, and very likely more.
Oh, Lizzie, why am I thus singled out from my family and blessed above them all? If I could but see you as happy.
If you were to give me 20 such men, I never could be so happy as you. Till I have your disposition, your goodness, I never can have your happiness. No, let me shift for myself, and perhaps in time I may have the very good luck to meet with another Mr. Collins.
Indeed.
Mamma, Mamma, I have no notion of how to proceed.
It is Lady Catherine de Bourgh come to call.
No!
Yes.
I am astonished beyond all expectation. I have shown myself in.
You are very welcome, Lady Catherine.
I hope you're well, Miss Bennet. That lady, I suppose, is your mother?
Lady Catherine de Bourgh, Mr. and Mrs. Bennet.
And these, I suppose, are your sisters?
Yes, madam. My youngest of all is lately married.
This must be a most inconvenient sitting room for evening in the summer. The windows are full west.
Indeed, we never sit here after dinner and...
Miss Bennet, there seems to be a prettyish kind of little wilderness on one side of your lawn. I should be glad to take a turn in it if you will favor me with your company. You can be at no loss, Miss Bennet, to understand the reason of my journey hither.
Indeed, you are mistaken. I cannot account for the honor.
However insincere you may choose to be, you shall not find me so. My character has ever been celebrated for its sincerity and frankness. I was told that not only your sister was on the point of being most advantageously married, but that you would, in all likelihood, be united with my own nephew, Mr. Darcy. Though I know it to be a scandalous falsehood, I have arrived to make my sentiments known to you.
If you believed it untrue, I wonder you took the trouble of coming so far.
To have the report universally contradicted. Can you declare there is no foundation to it?
Your ladyship may ask questions which I shall choose not to answer.
This is not to be borne.
Your ladyship has declared it impossible.
But your arts and allurements may, in a moment of infatuation, make him forget what he owes to himself and to all his family. You may have drawn him in.
If I have, I shall be the last person to confess it.
Miss Bennet, I am unaccustomed to such language as this. I am entitled to know all of his dearest concerns.
But you are not entitled to know mine.
Mr. Darcy is engaged to my daughter. Now what have you to say?
Thus, you can have no reason to suppose he would make an offer to me.
From his earliest hours, his mother and I planned the union, and he is destined for his cousin.
But what is that to me?
Honor, decorum, prudence, nay, interest forbid it. Your alliance will be a disgrace. You have neither family, connections, nor fortune. Your name will never even be mentioned by any of us.
These are heavy misfortunes, but the wife of Mr. Darcy will have no cause to repine.
Tell me, once and for all, are you engaged to him?
I am not.
And will you promise me never to enter into such an engagement?
I will make no promise of the kind. I must beg, therefore, to be importuned no further on the subject.
Not so hasty, if you please. To the objections I have already urged, I have another to add. I am no stranger to the particulars of your younger sister's infamous elopement.
Lady Catherine.
A patched-up business at the expense of your father and uncle.
I must
Is such a girl to be my nephew's sister? Is her husband, who is the son of his late father's steward, to be his brother? Heaven and earth! Of what are you thinking? Are the shades of Pemberley to be thus polluted?
You have insulted me in every possible method. I must beg to return to the house.
You are resolved to ruin him in the opinion of all his friends and make him the contempt of the world against the claims of duty, honor, and gratitude?
Neither duty, honor, nor gratitude have any claim on me in the present instance.
Very well. I shall now know how to act. Do not imagine, Miss Bennet, that